We welcome you to episode 33 of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. He is Rich Griffin. I'm Scott MacArthur. And if you're watching at youtube.com/@exitphilosophy and you do this religiously, you know that I have a variety of different backgrounds. And this is the Oakville, Ontario background because I'm in town as we speak. And Griff, you can also tell by the way that I'm dressed as we talk, approaching the dinner hour on Monday, August the 19th, that it's friggin' cold out all of a sudden. And what the hell? It's summer. I come from the Maritimes where we're always told that it's too wet out there and it can get too cold at weird times of the year and blah, blah, blah. And here I am back visiting and I'm freezing today.
Yeah, I was out this afternoon walking Kramer, the dog,
Giddy up.
and there was an old woman in a park raking leaves on the other side of the street, and I'm going, have I fallen into a time warp here? This is ridiculous.
You're wondering where the Halloween decorations
Oh
are?
yeah. But yeah, no, that's and you're back for the anniversary of your parents, right?
I am. Yeah. So congratulations to my mom and dad, Terry and Jamie MacArthur, on their 50th wedding anniversary, which was Thursday of last week, so August the 15th. And I flew in on Friday and we got mums and dad's siblings and only one of them has a partner, spouse, all together. And my brother and sister-in-law were there and we went to dinner. So I'm gonna pump it now because we went to dinner at Jack's Bistro.
I saw the Instagram post. It looks like a nice place.
Jack's Bistro on Kerr Street. And anybody from Oakville or the area who knows Oakville will say Kerr Street. And Kerr had a bit of a reputation back in the day, and maybe it still has one, but a little bit less so. And let's say like
Been
Oak,
gentrified.
Oakville having a rough area is a very relative term. Like it's very relative. Like Oakville doesn't really have rough areas, but unbelievable
Like
restaurant.
Gangs of New York light.
Yeah, yeah. Emphasis on the word light.
Right.
But Jack's Bistro on Kerr Street, highly recommend it. My dad and I got the same dish. We got the scallop risotto. And of course, the moment I see risotto, I can only think of George Costanza and his girlfriend from that one episode where she seems quite pleased with the risotto and later seems less pleased with what's going on after the risotto. And George sort of spends the episode trying to get her to respond to him in the way that she responded to the risotto when they were out for dinner. But it was an unbelievable meal. So good to be back. So good to celebrate. My parents were almost 24 and just turned 23 when they got married, and they eloped in 1974 at a time where you didn't really do that. So a very quick story, Griff. I promise it'll be quick. My parents got married at Old City Hall in Toronto on August 15th, 1974, a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dad called two of his buddies from the accounting firm he worked at to meet them so that they could be witnesses to the marriage. They both remember my parents that the justice of the peace did not seem amused because that's just not how you got married back then, right? I mean, it's pretty common now and nobody would think twice about it, but back then, And my aunt, my mom's sister, was living in Santa Monica at the time. And so they jumped in the car and drove across the continent, eventually getting to Los Angeles, where they spent some time with my aunt. They stopped in Des Moines, Iowa, and sent telegrams to both sets of parents, to my future grandparents. And that's how their parents found out that they were they were married. I just think it's such a cool story, and it was so ahead of its time, and they just didn't want the pomp and circumstance, and so they did it their way. It's
Yeah,
pretty
that's
cool.
two other things from this weekend that I want to ask you about. One of them is the NFL season is upon us. Week two just of the exhibition season just happened. And I know that you've spoken in the past about how the NFL controls the entire 12-month calendar. And before we get into the Niners game, which was on TV, and that's your beloved San Francisco 49ers, they were playing New Orleans. Um, yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the NFL season just ended, and now that here they are about to begin again. I mean, you admire that. I know that.
Yeah, well, and wait until the 18th game is added to the regular season, Griff, and an extra bye week comes with it, which pushes the Super Bowl back 2 weeks to President's Day weekend in the United States. So Americans will have the day after the Super Bowl off work. And that will push the Super Bowl into more or less late February, mid to late February, which means the NFL is about to get us most of the way through the winter. And God bless it for that. Especially when your team,
They'll hand it off to spring training right there.
yes, but yeah, especially when your team goes to the Super Bowl, you're really invested well into February now, as I found out or was reminded this past year. But I just think what makes the National Football League so digestible now, Griff, is that we have all succumbed to it. You know, people my age and your age like to say, kids these days have no attention span and they're hooked on their phones and da da da. I got news for us. We're all hooked. And we've all taken hits to our attention span as a result of that. And what the NFL is a neatly configured weekly league that plays at this point only 17 regular season games, which makes each game hugely consequential. And you know how many baseball games in a 162 game season do you have to play to equal one of the 17 NFL games? And so you can lock in on your favorite team for 3 hours once a week, commit to that, cheer them on, and see how they do, and know that that result matters. You have your fantasy teams, people gamble, blah 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 blah. I just think it's an easily digestible sport in an era of low attention span.
Yeah, I think that gambling is such a huge part of it, and it's to me it started with the preponderance of office pools and gambling on the Super Bowl, and they realized that there was so much invested time-wise into fantasy leagues and individual players, not just teams. I think there are more people fans of their fantasy league team than there are of individual NFL teams. And it may be close. I know that you're a diehard Niners fan, and but across the nation, there's so many fans across people I know, young kids that I know, and my kids and their friends that are just so invested in fantasy leagues. And that means you got to watch every game because your player isn't, you may have 8 different skill players playing in 8 different games. So you gotta pay attention, you gotta watch it. Baseball is trying to catch up, but it's more difficult, as you point out, because it's 162 games, and how do you organize stuff like that?
Well, and the other thing, Griff, is like there are no local television deals in the NFL in the regular season and playoffs, right? Every game is national. Now, there are different regions, but in this day and age of Sunday Ticket and whatnot, if you buy the right package, you have access to all of the games. So there is a national flair to all of it. And because, and I said earlier, look, you can commit the 3 hours to your favorite team if you have one, but Sunday really becomes from 1 o'clock Eastern time, 10 a.m. Pacific, to when the clock runs out on the fourth quarter of the Sunday night football game. You're flipping around. So your favorite team's game goes to commercial. You spend the next 3 minutes. It matters to me what happens to the Dallas Cowboys, and I always want it the result to be bad unless it's in the 49ers' interest for the Cowboys to beat the Rams or whatever. But like we're flipping around, and so you just, whereas with baseball, I mean, we do get offerings out of market. Sportsnet has X number of games, and you can stay up late and watch the Dodgers play on the West Coast every now and then and whatnot. But if you don't have the package off of MLB's website, you know, you're not flipping around and familiarizing yourself with every team the way that it seems and feels very easy to do with the NFL. So
Yeah.
it's a neatly packaged league.
Yeah, definitely. And the third item from this weekend, we talked about your parents' anniversary. We talked about the NFL, Wrigley Field.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the 3-game series that the Jays played and the games being on TV, except for Friday on Apple, which I mean, a lot of people get, but it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, take a bite out of that, Griff.
But I mean, that must have warmed the cockles of your heart to watch games from Wrigley where you've invested a lot of emotion and time, really.
Yeah. It's so cool, right? We were there as a family the last time the Jays were there. Same weekend, not the exact same dates, but the same weekend of August in 2017. You remember Kevin Pillar went into the brick wall? It's like,
I was there. I was covering, yeah.
yeah, Kevin Pillar went into the brick wall and made an unbelievable catch, and that's a braver play in that stadium than any other park
I think they
in
were swept then, weren't they?
baseball. They were. You may recall in the Sunday finale, the Jays got 2 runs off Koji Uehara in the top of the 10th, and then Roberto Osuna gave up 3 in the bottom of the 10th, and it might have been the 11th, but it was extra innings. And the Cubs swept the Jays. And when you talk to people involved with that team, Griff, they talk about how they still felt like they had a shot at a wild card spot in the American League heading into Wrigley and then coming out of Wrigley. And this was after there were no additions of any consequence made at the trade deadline, and the teardown was slowly but surely happening of the Bautista, Donaldson, Encarnacion teams. Bautista was still there. Donaldson was there, but you know, I think he had a good second half in 2017, but was battling injuries a lot by that point. But they just kind of they left Wrigley, and it was like that might have done us in.
My favorite moment from that series was we were the clubhouse is elevated. The visitors clubhouse is elevated. You got to go up rickety stairs and at the time walk across the concourse above, and they could throw things at you. They built fences so you couldn't be hit by anything, but fans could see you, and it was a treat. Anyway, the manager's office was just inside the door of the clubhouse, and then the hallway led to the main part of the clubhouse. And we were in John Gibbons' office, and Ryan Tepera was going to be the closer that day because Osuna, was he still there?
Well, Osuna, I think
whoever
I thought Osuna coughed it up on the Sunday in extra innings after the Jays.
The first game of the series, he went back.
Osuna's meltdown was 2018, the whole off the field stuff, I think. Yeah.
So he went back to the hotel because he was not feeling well. So Tepera was going to be the closer that day. And we asked Gibby, hey, Tepera's got a save for you, doesn't he? And Gibby goes, hey, I think it was here. I think it was here. And just then Tepera walks by the door, and Gibby goes, hey, Ryan, you remember the save that you had here? And Tepera looked in and just totally dry said, yeah, it's that was when you didn't know what my name was. He said. So, and then Tepera laughed and just kept going, and we looked at Gibby. What, you didn't know what your relief pitcher's name was? Oh, well, I had so many pitchers.
But I see, I don't remember that because the Cubs came to Toronto in 2014. That was still when they were doing the every 3 years thing, right? The 3 division. So I don't. My recollection of 2017 was that the Jays had not gone to Wrigley since Halladay was on the team. And it was funny because they took 2 out of 3 at Wrigley in like '05 or '06, but they lost the Halladay start.
It wasn't Tepera's save at Wrigley. It was his own career save.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So your new closer has one career save. And then he walked, coincidentally, he walked by the door, and that's
okay.
yeah. So it wasn't that Wrigley. It was just one in his career. That's all.
I'll tear the veneer back a little bit. Sometimes this is behind the scenes stuff that you wonder if you should share or not, but just a glimpse into the man John Gibbons is. So my nephew, so today is Monday, August the 19th as we talk. My nephew turns 10 tomorrow on Tuesday, August the 20th. The Sunday game of that series 7 years ago was August the 20th. He turned 3. My niece was 2+ months old. The photos are incredible. Tiny, tiny little thing at the time, right? Like still a total infant. And so we had bought tickets and done the whole thing. Like we were on vacation as a family. I was no longer on the Blue Jays beat. I was hosting my own radio show on TSN 1050 at the time, but I still had my BBWAA membership. So I brought that card. So we arrive at the ballpark, we're getting situated and all that. And I said to my folks, I'm going to sneak down into the Jays clubhouse. And I walked into John Gibbons' office and he was alone in there. He said, Scotty, because I wasn't covering the team as much anymore. So I really didn't see him that much. What are you doing here? So I explained it all. And it included that it was my nephew's birthday this weekend. He's turning 3. And Gibby goes to his hangar in that visitor's manager's office at Wrigley Field, which wasn't built yesterday. It was just literally like a hangar, like a thing that was outside, just hung. And he pulled out his royal blue alternate jersey and his road gray jersey. He autographed them both and said, give one to your nephew and one to your niece. And so they still have those jerseys, I'm sure, packed away and tucked away a little bit. But I just thought, man, that's we sometimes you hear me, Griff, go on about behaving like a human and whatever. That's the sort of thing that life is all about. This sport is all about.
I don't want.
He didn't buy any favors from me, but I just appreciated the gesture.
I don't want to pile on with kudos for John Gibbons, but the second time around, so that would have been what, 2013 as manager?
Yes, his first year, second tenure was 13. Yeah,
I think it was whatever it was he was named. He had his press conference here. He went home to San Antonio. I flew to San Antonio to have an exclusive interview on his home turf and go to the San Antonio Missions ballpark and talk to the people there. Anyway, it was a nice piece, and we were going to lunch, and he picked me up at the hotel, and we were going to go take some photos at the Alamo. And so he's been in San Antonio since he was like in elementary school.
Yeah, and I know this story. It's great.
He can't find the Alamo. He doesn't know where it is. He doesn't remember the Alamo.
He doesn't remember. He forgot the Alamo.
So we could drive around, and we park like a half a mile away, and we walk there, and then we go to lunch. So I'm doing the interview in a booth, and we're having lunch. And it turns out I was talking with him about Patrick, my son, who was a freshman at College of St. Rose, was the first Canadian to play for that program. He hadn't even been on the field yet, so it was that time of the year, and so he was interested. He asked me how that Pat was a catcher and whatever. So I finished the interview, write it, had a great picture of him at the Alamo that when you Google John Gibbons, it still comes up. It's got the Texas flags flying in the background. It's really the only good picture I've ever taken in my entire 70 years of life. And so I go home, and Pat calls me and says, a glove just showed up from San Antonio.
Wow.
We sent him a catcher's glove.
Yeah.
We hadn't even been on the field yet for they were the Golden Knights. That's the school that sued uh, Las Vegas for the name.
Got it. Okay. Interesting connection. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, College of St. Rose Golden Knights, and Gibby thought enough to go to his manufacturer and say, "Can you send a glove?" And he looked up the address, got the address for the college, sent it to him care of. It was great. It was a great gesture, and like you
Yeah.
said, didn't gain him any points because I still ripped him every chance I got.
Yeah. And he would expect no
Oh
less.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was great.
Um, but just so if and I want to be careful not to repeat because you can go to the archives and listen to old episodes. You can watch us on youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. Caught a foul ball at Wrigley Field in the first inning of my first ever game there, August the 31st, 1993. So I was 14 years old off the bat of Mark Grace. Cubs got spanked by the Philadelphia Phillies that day, 7-0. Ben Rivera, who was the fifth starter on that Phillies World Series team that lost to the Blue Jays a couple months later, pitched that game for Philadelphia. So I still have that ball. I think I've shown it on YouTube here previously on the podcast. I have gone to Wrigley with college friends, with a partner back in the day. I went by myself to Chicago for 2 games in 2004. So I have traveled with partners, with friends, by myself through the years. In 2009, saw Alfonso Soriano hit a walk-off grand slam to beat the Houston Astros, who at the time were still in the National League and in the Cubs Central Division, a 5-1 win in 14 innings. Was debating how long I wanted to stay. Soriano walked it off. I go back to 2003. Two of my friends from Algonquin College, we had graduated by then, but were pals, stayed in touch. We were young guys working in radio at the time, and I said, we got to go to Wrigley. And one of my friends who came on that trip, Griff, was an Expos fan lifelong from PEI, lifelong. But he was starting to consider himself a free agent because, as we sadly know, the death march of the Expos was well on its way by 2003. And I remember, and I'd obviously been to Wrigley, but I remember we got into the stadium, and the concourse is the concourse, but we got to the tunnel to enter the stadium to get our seats. And we got through the tunnel and met the usher. And I turned over and I looked at Matt. And we're just guys in our early 20s. And he has tears in his eyes. Because you got to understand, same thing with Fenway. And I know we like to joke that Fenway's a bit of a dump and all that, but that's more Boston. If you haven't been to Wrigley, when you first get there and walk in and see the field for the first time and the ivy and the scoreboard and all that, it actually hits you like, wow, this is incredible. And I realized without even asking him, I mean, this is a guy from Prince Edward Island, grew up blue collar, went to college in Ottawa, like maybe like Candlestick Park for me in San Francisco, and I got there right before it closed to see a Niners game. That's so far away, Wrigley Field. It's just a dream. Anyway, Matt became a Cubs fan that weekend, and we specifically picked Giants games so we could see Barry Bonds. And we saw Barry Bonds in batting practice break a window of an apartment building across the right field, so Sheffield.
Right.
He hit a ball in batting practice so far he shattered a window over the street, across the street, all that. And I remember in the playoffs, because 2003 later on was when Steve Bartman and the whole Alex Gonzalez bobbled the double play ground ball. That was the bigger deal than the Bartman thing. But prior to that, Matt had said to me in the middle of that series when they were up 3-1 on the Marlins in the NLCS, I kind of feel bad and like a bandwagon jumper. Like, Cubs are about to go to the World Series, and I've been a fan for 2 months. I really don't feel like I deserve this. And I looked at him and I said, Matty, don't go there yet. Just wait. And sure enough, so in 2016, when they won, he and I texted and I said, you remember you said this? I said, you paid your dues. Now you enjoy it like the rest of us do. So, but in that 2003, we saw Matt Clement. Remember him? Throw a shutout. And I turned to Matt and Garnet, my two friends I was with. I said, mark this down, boys. Matt Clement's best start in his major league career just happened. Because Clement was a good pitcher, but not a great pitcher, and he was not Kerry Wood or Carlos Zambrano or Mark Pryor. He was a back-end guy on that team. So anyway, I got so many, I go on, and then the Wrigleyville and drinks and fun, like go on and on.
I got three that count. I mean, I got more than that. I'm like you. I got all sorts of memories of being at Wrigley Field because we would go there 3 times for a 3-game series with the Expos, and I did that from 1979 to 94, and then a lot of games after that just because it was Wrigley. But in 83, they were shooting the movie Rookie of the Year.
93, I think you mean probably.
93.
Yeah.
You sure? 90.
Yeah, because it came out when I was alive, or I was alive in 83, but I remember it.
They're shooting the movie and they needed a crowd, so they waited until after an Expos Cubs game, and they asked the crowd to stay if they wanted to be part of a movie that was being shot, and nobody knew what the movie was, how it was going to turn out, but it turned out into a fun little opus. But my job involved coming down from the press box and going to the clubhouse after the game. So that was exactly in the wheelhouse of when they were shooting the B-roll, the footage of the game that was supposedly taking place in the movie. And so I tell my kids to look for me in that crowd shot when they're watching the movie. And I hate to say that I can't find myself, but I know I'm there. I know I'm there. So there's that. And then 03 was the Bartman game. Moises Alou was like still to this day, a very good friend.
Yes.
And so I know he would have caught that. I know he was going to catch that ball. And then he just wouldn't let it go after the game. And it was like the next day I went up to him at batting practice. I said, Mo, wouldn't this be something special if when you guys win game 7, you invite Bartman to come out and sit in your seats? Wouldn't that be special? And he looked at me and he didn't answer. So I don't know whether it ever would have happened.
But how did he look at you? Like, if looks could kill, would you be dead?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It was more of skepticism.
Okay.
But I'm sure if he had thought about it and they had won game 7, that it might have happened. It might have been a rewrite of history, and Bartman's life might have been altered. I'm sure he wishes it was. But that was another memory. And then, of course, this weekend, my sister Lorna from Calgary and my daughter Kelly from Ottawa, they have an annual niece aunt baseball trip.
Amazing. They went
to Wrigley, and the photos that Kelly sent back and the emotion that I could see was just touching. It was exactly the way it should have been. So
yeah, it's a special place, man. It just is. And you and I talk about, we've done this every now and then on the podcast, talked about certain stadiums and certain cities. Hey, if you can afford it and you've got the time and you can take the time, get to here, get to there. Chicago, man. And Chicago itself is a great city. The downtown, I know the South Side is a tougher spot. But I'm talking about the Magnificent Mile and Grant Park, and Rush Street is full of restaurants and nightlife, and there's so much to do. Wrigleyville itself is nightlife by itself.
Now, what I love about Wrigleyville, and that's the area right around Wrigley Field, is that win or lose, and I've mentioned this before, win or lose, you could go into any one of those restaurants or bars at the 4 corners of the ballpark, And you wouldn't know whether they had won or lost because
Mm.
people are the same. They're celebrating baseball, they're celebrating life in Chicago, they're celebrating their friends, and they're having a beer or whatever their drink of choice is. And it's great. And you don't see that too often. And it's what makes the Wrigley and the Cubs experience worthwhile, worth picking out of the ballparks that you could go to. Make sure you get to it, even if it's not the Blue Jays playing, if you're a Jays fan, even if it's just another series. It's a great experience and everybody should do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And every now and then, because you get talking to people there, you'll run into Americana personified. And I remember being at a game in 2004, and I got talking to a couple of the two buddies sitting, they were pals with each other, sitting beside me. And the guy right beside me says, "You're Canadian, aren't you? I can tell by your accent." And I said, and I was living in Ottawa at the time. So he said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from the Toronto area," but I figured he wouldn't know what Ottawa is. So I said, "I'm from the Toronto area, but I live closer to Montreal now." And he looks at me and he goes, "So you live in Winnipeg?"
You
The
were right.
other one, the other one, I'm there in 2009, and Mets fans, a mother, a father, and two teenage kids are there from New Jersey. Now, the Cubs were playing the Astros, but they wanted to get to Wrigley, so they were Mets fans. So the mom is sitting right beside me. And so we're talking, going back and forth. And she asks where, again, from Toronto area, living in Ottawa, because it's 2009, blah, blah, blah. Do all the niceties and get to know you a bit. Quiet for about 3 innings. She comes back to me and she says, "Can I ask you a question? You said you went to a lot of Toronto Blue Jays games growing up in Canada. Did you also go to a lot of Seattle Mariners games?"
Oh,
And
that's a good
she
question if you live
and
in Vancouver.
and she could tell by the look on my face immediately that she had done an American geography thing.
Right.
And I smiled and I said, "Look, you're a Mets fan, right?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, I said, "Well, me flying to Seattle to see the Mariners play would be like you flying to San Francisco to see the Mets play, like to watch a Mets Giants game, like the distance." And she's like, "Well, she wasn't defensive. We had a laugh." She said, I know there's a major Canadian city near Seattle." I said, "Vancouver." She said, "That's right." So anyway, the people you meet, right? They're all good people, but maybe need a map.
So let's get to the Blue Jays and the issues of the day, which to me is now Bo Bichette and Vlad. And we talk about it all the time. I think with Bo that there's a lot of Canadian fans and Blue Jays fans who don't believe it until they see it in an American publication that Bo is not happy here, that Bo is unlikely to re-sign with the Blue Jays. It's not news to anyone who has been following our podcast or following the situation. But what at this point, Bo is doing baseball activities down in Dunedin. Could be back in September. Is beginning to run. What's your assessment of that situation?
Well, I like that you ask about one specific as opposed to us lumping them together, because it
Yeah,
feels
yeah.
like it's two very different
No
scenarios
longer, it
now.
has no longer lumped together. It's definitely individual
What,
situations
Griff?
for both those guys.
So, I do that thing, and I swear to you, I'm not deferring when I do this, but answering your question with a question. What's the impediment here? So let's for a second set aside that there needs to be natural hesitation on the team's part because it's been a really bad year. It's also been an injury riddled year when he has not been performing poorly on the field. All things being equal from the player's perspective. And we've talked about it. Rosie DiMano did a sit down a month and a half ago with Bo, and he even acknowledged to her, I got to find that fire again. Like he admitted, I've lost some fire here. What's the impediment? I mean, because let's just lay this out. Okay. He signs a 3-year contract to buy out his arbitration years, to walk him to free agency with confirmed raises guaranteed year over year. So even though this is a lost season for him, he's getting a healthy raise next year because he is signed.
Yeah, he's going to be making $17 million.
One would presume that signing that deal to walk yourself right to free agency would more or less, plus the passage of time, alleviate any sort of ill feelings you have about the way that the Jays assess salaries for pre-arbitration eligible players. And we know that Bo Bichette's one of more than one Blue Jay, Alek Manoah did it too, that don't like the way the Jays assign salary in years where the team, years 1 through 3 for a player's service time, where the team literally tells you what it is that you're going to make.
Common across the industry.
Yeah, so let's assume that that's out of the way now because he's a rich man and will get richer. What's the impediment here? Where did this all go wrong? Why has it soured so badly? And you may be thinking, Griff, with that look on your face, Scott, are you asking a rhetorical question? And I might say to you, Griff, with the look on my face, Griff, you're onto something. But what do you think the impediment or impediments is or are in this situation from the player's perspective?
Well, I think the expectations going into the 2024 season were such that Bo thought that he could be a leader of a group that challenged again for 89 to 92 wins because the pitching staff was in place. He and Vlad were expected to lead the way. And Bo was the most vocal returning clubhouse presence. He had sort of morphed into a leadership role in that clubhouse, but with everything falling apart in terms of competing in 2024, I think and you just quoted him as saying he had lost his fire. He knows he had lost his fire. I don't think it's something that he can get back with this group, with this clubhouse, with this front office, to the point where he would even be interested in signing for 2026 and beyond. And I think the Blue Jays need to sit back and not think about necessarily trading him at the start of the offseason, because coming off an injury-riddled season and with numbers that he's put up, they might be better off waiting until the trade deadline, making sure that he's healthy. He might even show how healthy he is at spring training and get a better package from another team needing a shortstop than he would in November, December. Or
so this is in no way salvageable in your opinion, or I don't want to put words in your.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think the attention of the organization now has to shift towards Vlad, because Vlad is that guy. And Bo, I thought, I mean, going
but
back.
Griff, why do
podcasts, we talked about Bo and Vlad. I talked about Bo and Vlad and the need to have the face of your organization, the face of your team be homegrown guys. But Bo's situation now with the injury, with him souring, with him letting some people very quietly know that he's not interested in signing a free agent deal here, that has changed everything that we thought from a while ago. But basically it comes down to the injury and the fact that they're not even going to finish 500 this year.
Okay, so hypothetical world. Let me create a hypothetical scenario for you. There's a brand new front office, and I'm talking about the front-facing, public-facing people in the front office. I'm not talking about everybody in baseball ops. There's a new president and a new general manager this winter. Is it salvageable? Or is it just, I don't want to live in Canada, this city, I'm done with it, I need a fresh spot. There's nothing that can be done to save this. Because you know that I'm hammering on this, and there's a lovey-dove-dove going on. I mean, I thought the dopamine rush from the trade deadline would be gone by now, but the dopamine rush continues because suddenly, apparently, we've forgotten about the failed season, and we're now just really excited about watching young players getting their feet wet in the majors. And we wish each and every one of them well. That's not my point. My point is that what's going on right now should not be going on because this thing went sideways and it was the result of a failed process being doubled down upon. And so what I'm wondering, Griff, is because as I've stated here before, this cannot, if what is not salvageable to me is the credibility of the top of this front office, and to continue to employ this front office going forward is, to me, a dereliction of duty on the part of ownership. And so what I'm wondering is, using Bo Bichette as an example, is this salvageable if the necessary changes to the front office are made?
I think it is salvageable in terms of this clubhouse has seen over 9 years. I mean, they see the same thing inside the clubhouse as everyone sees outside the clubhouse, that this team had promise. This team was consistently wild card worthy. That was the sustainability, not to win the division, but to be in the playoffs. And once you get your foot in the door. But I don't believe that Bo and anyone else who has been here for a while has any more faith in that current front office. And that would be, at this point, why it's unsalvageable in terms of bringing Bo back from 2026 and beyond. But if they were to change, if like some GMs are not capable of handling big payrolls, they're good at making smaller deals, at bringing talent in that was undiscovered, that was about to blossom into, serviceable major league players, which is clearly what's happened with the Blue Jays, with the deal with the Astros. I mean, nobody there looks like they're going to be a superstar, but they look like serviceable players. Will Wagner, Joey Loperfido, Jake Bloss. Some people can't handle the big payroll, and I spoke about that with Kevin Malone when he was taking that '94 Expos team to the best record in baseball on a team payroll that was $15 million. And then he went to Los Angeles and had unlimited resources and screwed it up. He couldn't handle it. Same guy, different situation. And I think that that's happening with this front office that came in from Cleveland and had a small budget. And now here, all of a sudden, ownership is giving them $225 million to spend, and they haven't spent it wisely, apparently. So to answer your question, I think it's salvageable, but not with this current group. And I don't know what your thoughts are. I know that you're not a big fan of this current group, but do you think it's salvageable? Just because they change GM and president doesn't mean that he would change his mind.
No, that's right. That's right. And the answer is I don't know. I am confident that it's over if this current front office remains employed. And I'm confused. Actually, no, I'm not confused because I have my own personal experiences. But I am disappointed in, let me rephrase that one more time, because I'm going to give ownership the end of the season and the first couple of weeks after the season ends to do what's right. And if they don't, I will be disappointed at the inertia. Because I just think we've seen too much publicly. There's too much testimony privately, and there's a long track record. And aside from all of those very legitimate things, there are the slightly less legitimate arguments, because there's a first for everything, that you really don't get to build it up and tear it down and build it up and tear it down and build it up and tear it down over and over and over again, unless you have some World Series sprinkled in there to justify longevity like this. And so, you know, the Vladdy thing is confusing to me, Griff, because I've wavered on that, and now it's very obvious that he is a necessity and may very well be just flourishing and coming back into his own as he enters his prime age years. And I'm just equally as confused about Bo Bichette because he has gone from being the guy a year and a half ago we were saying this is his team. It's not Vladdy's team, it's his team. He is the guy with the joie de vivre. He is the guy with the flipping hair and the flair out there, and he plays a prime position. And you know, he has 200 hits in a season, and he's you know, the young, good-looking kid, you want to build around him and blah blah blah. And now it's like, well, that didn't work. So it's just, to me, you know, can Bo get back to being that player, or is he just sort of a mid-level defender who, if he's not hitting, is never getting on base because he won't take a walk? I don't know.
That's why it would behoove them to wait until the middle of next season, maybe the trade deadline, before they make a decision on on Bo, because the package will be better. But maybe we can't separate Bo and Vlad, and brings us back to you saying I'm glad we're not talking about them together. I'm saying that if Vlad signs the contract which he deserves and which the team needs to sign him to, and you say, I mean, we argued off air about or discussed.
First of all,
we discussed,
yeah,
how long, what should the term be, and the per year, the average annual value. But I think if early in the offseason, the Blue Jays negotiated with Vlad and signed him to a representative deal, that it would convince the fans that they were serious. It would convince Bo, maybe I got to relook at this. If you know, because he's making his $17 million next year, no matter what. So maybe he would have another look at it. And to me, it would be like Jose Bautista when he was the key member of the Toronto Blue Jays, and how he would go and recruit his friends and say, hey, why don't you come join us? It's like the NBA model of you find 3 stars and put them on the same team and you've got yourself a contender. And I think that Vlad could serve that role as well if you locked him up early in the offseason. If you make him wait, he's going to go somewhere else. If you make him, he's gone.
Here's what I'm going to say. If they keep this front office, being ownership, this ownership needs a win in the most desperate way. And if I'm Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s people, I am in his ear and I am negotiating them to the hills because they need him.
But that's not.
I'm not taking a dime less.
I'm not saying that they don't change front office. I'm not saying that that would save this front office. I'm saying that it would save this franchise moving forward and make them a legit contender moving forward. And it's not going to be a rebuilding year. The fans need to see that. The fans need to buy tickets. The fans were told in June that they needed to put their down payment for next year's season tickets. I don't see a lot of that. I hear from a lot of people saying they didn't do it, that they're not going to do it. And I think that they need to make a dramatic move, and more than a trade, it could be a new contract with Vlad, making him the face of the franchise and convincing even free agents on the outside that this might be a place that means business, because you look at their 75 and 87, which is likely end of season record. That's not going to convince free agents. That's not going to convince players looking to win that this is the place to go. But Vlad being on board and reaching out and talking to his friends and talking to free agents about how good he feels about this team moving forward, that might be the answer.
If I'm Vladimir Guerrero Jr., it's 350 minimum, and I'm not starting the negotiation with my minimum. So it's 350 minimum, but that's not the first number out of my mouth. And the desperation here is very real.
Number out of your mouth is more?
Aim high, and it all depends on the desperation. I mean, you got ownership with essentially a new stadium. You've got ownership that lacks competency, that has a front office that people who buy tickets, not everybody, but a good number, strongly dislike at this point, and who, if you're going to keep them around, desperately and badly need a victory, like in the worst way. You can leverage that for sure. And if I'm Vladimir Guerrero Jr., I absolutely do it.
I could structure something imaginatively. I mean, you look at Shohei, and they obviously backhand loaded it for like 30 years, but they could do something with imagination. And in fact, the front office, whoever it is, this group or another group, might choose to take the 17 million from Bo Bichette and use that to defray whatever costs there are. And Chris Bassett could be traded, because you look now and all of a sudden Bowden Francis looks legit, Yariel Rodriguez, and then they would still have Barrios and Gosman. So there are ways of creating the space to sign Vlad, but more than anything else, I do believe that signing Vlad is the key to sustainability of a contender here with the Blue Jays at Rogers Center, and the rest of it can be figured out. But I mean, I'm not arguing with you that 350 could be a number
The
for
minimum.
Vlad.
Yeah. I look at it, Griff.
But you look at the list of players making that much money right now, and it's less than a handful.
Right. And he what, turns 26 next year.
Yeah,
So he is literally entering his prime.
Yeah.
There's that.
Which is
Plus,
the crazy argument against not, or for not trading him, because he's entering his prime. You trade him, you're looking for a player at 25 in his prime who can produce the numbers that Vlad's producing. And you've already got Vlad.
well, and plus, you don't have, despite the dopamine rush of 3 weeks ago, you do not have a minor league system that's producing another Vlad or another Bo like 2019 did.
MLB Pipeline says 24th best system in baseball.
So, right. And Will Wagner is off to a wonderful start, and it's a great story. And his dad was a great closer, threw 100 before it was fashionable, all that. The best thing with Will Wagner right now, aside from his performance to date, is that nobody has nicknamed him Babe, because reality sets in, right? And that doesn't mean he's not going to be a big league ball player. It just means we got to wait a little bit. And the hype machine gonna hype, right? Because
I think the best thing for Will Wagner and Spencer Horwitz is the descent into mediocrity of Davis Schneider after the Babe was christened out of Fenway Park because of one weekend and a mustache.
Yeah.
And now there's a certain amount of careful evaluation of Will Wagner's start and of Spencer Horwitz, who's had a nice, he's going to be a career major league player, but at what level, we're not sure. But where Davis Schneider is a caveat to those who are quick to anoint.
Right. And I say with the Vladdy thing again, you know, we talk about where this could go if Vlad leaves. And it used to be if Vladdy and Bo leave, and it is still in its own way that, because if Bo has a great 3.5 months leading up to the trade deadline next year, and it's still very clear they got to move him to get something, then that's going to be painful, more so than it would feel now, given the way that this year has gone. But if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is gone, then what? Then what in your fancy new stadium? Do we talk about 100 lost seasons, or even worse, Griff? Even worse, because we'll argue and debate sometimes what a market will tolerate. And the Jays didn't lose 100 games 3 or 4 times and da-da-da-da. You know what they did do? They were the most mediocre team. Like, not good and not bad. Truly mediocre for about 20 consecutive years under this ownership. From, well, I should be more accurate. 15 years under this ownership, because Rogers took over in 2000. Like, didn't win more than 86 or 88 that one time, and never lost more than 94 once, but most of the time it was in the 82 to 88 range that they would, like, true blue mediocrity. And if anybody thinks it's acceptable to go back to that,
Well,
God bless you.
without Bo and Vlad, you have 26 mercenaries in the clubhouse, and the homegrowns will only be first and second year players that don't have an impact with the fan base and the country. And the rest of them are all mercenaries who are only here for the money, don't care about the fan base, don't care about the city, don't care about the country. And that won't fly with a team that's gotten used to going on the road and being a part of that thing. And the face of that has been Bo and Vlad. And without those guys, it's just another team, and the fan following will likely die. And when you talk about the mediocrity of 20 years from 2000, you had a GM who was concerned, JP Ricciardi, concerned about his own job, and therefore was trying to win, but was always complaining about the money that he was being given to compete against Boston and New York, and using that as an excuse, but still wanting to win 76 to 82 games, 85 games, because it saved his sorry ass job.
Right. And ownership permitted it.
Right. And there was probably no assurance given to him that, okay, you can knock this down a little bit more, rebuild. We need draft picks. We need to do, and it hadn't been a model yet for Houston and Baltimore. It hadn't been a model, so he had nothing to look at in that regard. He could have been the first in that, but there was no assurance that he would still have his job at that point. So, yeah, it was a bad 20-year period, and or 15.
We can't go back to that.
Yeah, absolutely can't go back to that, because fans have been through that, and there was a generational change of the fan base from the 92-93 to the 15-16, and the 15-16 is a joyous, younger, partying on the road fan base. And if you lose that, is there a third generation that will pick up the mantle of Blue Jays fandom? I don't know.
There was a period of time, Griff.
I like this group. I like this group of fans. I think that they do more than this team has deserved in terms of support and travel and spending money and merchandise and going to the ballpark and using the neighborhoods in the outfield. This is the fan base that they want and that they deserve, but they only deserve it if they're competitive and put a team on the field that can at least reach the postseason.
And that's it. I mean, none of us want to go back there, but what ownership has shown us in the past doesn't mean it will going forward, and let's hope it doesn't, but is that it is willing to tolerate that type of mediocrity. And so my question is what is it willing to tolerate, given all that we have seen publicly, all that has been mused about privately, and the results that have reflected the ineffective process? Given all of that, what is ownership going to tolerate heading into this offseason? Because I agree, the right moves were made at the trade deadline. Nobody is going to argue that a non-contending team should not trade away its impending free agents. It's obvious that those are the moves you make. But these guys are more excited to make trades like that than they are to make trades to acquire and be aggressive and put a team that is contending over the top, because it's all about, and I'm not going to deride the word value. I understand that value, for example, is important. But these guys are tight to the vest. They're not going to be aggressive when it counts. They are content with the ceiling being what they believe, even if the results don't reflect it, good process. And they are content with the floor being, we get to make trades and add human beings to our minor league system if things don't go well. And we can tell everybody, look, way down there, that's the future. There's the hope again. Believe in that. That's what these guys are.
There was no imagination or thought put into the trade deadline, because all 8 trades involved single free agents. There were no combinations going out. It was 6 contracts of pending free agents, plus Nate Pearson, who for some reason the Cubs wanted, and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who was needed to go to Pittsburgh so that they could go under the luxury tax threshold. So it was all about, it wasn't about building the organization as much as it was getting under the threshold. And to do that, you had 6 contracts plus IKF that needed to go. So there wasn't a lot of imagination. It was, what would you give us for that? And they lucked it. It looks like a very good deal from the Astros.
Yep.
There are people who go, wow, how did you get that for Kikuchi? But if they go to the World Series with Kikuchi, it's worth it for the Astros. You know, they gave up 3 guys from their farm system. So all of a sudden, Buffalo's looking great. The Blue Jays are not looking as good as they were when Kikuchi was there. But the Astros get what they needed. And you always fall back on Pearson and Santiago Espinal. Or Pierce.
Yeah, Pierce for us. But like, you know, I consider that a win-win trade.
Boston won the World Series.
And Pierce was the World Series MVP. So he got hot at the right time. I mean, he wasn't the best player on the team, but he got hot. He was the hottest player on the team at just the right time. That's a win for Boston. But Santiago Espinal is a win for the Blue Jays because of where they were at the time. But what would you take? Would you prefer
I'd always take a
World Series MVP for 3 months?
Yeah, I'd always take a World Series for your major league team.
Or would you prefer a guy who had a hot 2 months, turned himself into an all-star because of it once, and was generally just okay for 3.5 years, perfectly nice guy, and then he moved on? I mean, you know, again, the goal here is to win, or at least I think it is, and I think there is a difference. Dave Dombrowski, who you know from your time in Montreal 30 years ago, Griff. Dave Dombrowski, and they do it a little differently, but Dave Dombrowski to me is the modern day Pat Gillick, because wherever Dave Dombrowski goes, they win. They just win. The Philadelphia Phillies, like, you could roll out of bed. You haven't watched baseball all year, check the standings. You're like, oh my God, the Philadelphia Phillies are friggin' good. Hey, you know who's running the Philadelphia Phillies? Dave Dombrowski. But 2 years ago, we heard, well, the Phillies are a team of designated hitters. You got Kyle Schwarber in left. You got Nick Castellanos in right. How does anybody catch a baseball on that? Well, no, Alec Baum becomes a really good player. You know, Bryce Harper has had his issues with health, and now he's settled in quite nicely at first base. That's his new position. JT Realmuto, the Miami Marlins are burning their hair off again. Let's go get one of the best catchers in the game. Oh, Zach Wheeler, we'll just poach him from a division rival, New York Mets, and he's one of our best pitchers. Aaron Nola, on and on it goes. Like, aggression, aggression, aggression. And no, they haven't won a World Series, but they've been to one with Dave Dombrowski, and they look like they could go to another one. And if they at least make the playoffs, they got a shot at winning it, and they might go deep. Like, it's fun. And I think there's a difference.
Dombrowski is like the GM that we were talking about earlier, who can win with a small budget. He did that. He did that when he went to the Marlins from the Expos, though both were small market. And then when they won a World Series in Florida, they dismantled that team because it was going to be making too much money. And instead of saying, okay, I'll build another one, Dombrowski said, no, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm here to win. Wherever I am, I'm there to win. So he went to Detroit, took a couple of years and built winners in Detroit, and then Boston, and then Phil. I mean, this guy's incredible.
I know.
And I know his game plan. Yeah.
Right. And you look at it, and I just think there are some general managers, front offices, that want the process to ultimately lead to the best results possible. And then there are others who are just content with the process. And if the results happen to come, well, that's a nice bonus. But it's the process that really gets us horny. And Dave Dombrowski wants to acquire, and win a World Series. And some people's view of the world is tied to, you know, I'm going to go home tonight, sit in my recliner, and just think about the 42 years of control I just acquired. Cost control. Yeah, you know, it wasn't as aggressive as we could have been. I'm being facetious in the sense that different teams are at different parts of their trajectories. But my point is I think some people get more excited with the idea of accruing
Well,
bases you can't see because they're in the minor leagues, and
guys,
control and value, as opposed to win a bloody playoff game and a playoff series and really go for the jugular and try to win the championship.
guys like Dombrowski and Alex Anthopoulos, they acquire talent to use analytics. They don't acquire, or they don't use analytics to acquire talent. And that's the way baseball should be.
I'll tell you this right now, Griff.
Cool. It's not the process is not to fill what you see as ideal baseball players through analytics. It's to acquire talent that your scouts and your evaluators see, and then use analytics to make them even better.
I'm telling you right now, Atlanta Braves won the World Series in 2021 with a completely remade outfield at the trade deadline because Ronald Acuna Jr., who sadly did it to the other knee this year, had blown his ACL. And they had lost their entire starting outfield to injury, Acuna leading the way. They went and got Jorge Soler. They went and got a couple of more bodies that
Rosario,
Eddie Rosario. Yeah, they went and got guys like that. Do you think this front office, if given the exact same opportunity in the exact same situation, would have done the same thing? I'm telling you, they would not have. They would not have, because it's just not in their DNA. Because there would have been some issue with value, or some issue with having to give up prospect depth, or some stupid bloody thing. And that's the difference. And I always hesitate because it's been a decade. I don't want to get into the Alex versus these guys thing. That's old and it's played. I'm talking about generalized philosophies of certain people. And these guys, they'll get you to a point, and they did in 2021 and 2022, but they won't get you further. And and I believe that this is mediocrity now, or this is sub-mediocrity this year, but it's settling into mediocrity, and I'm quite interested to see if ownership's going to tolerate it.
Scotty, have a look at your stopwatch. I think we've already run over our time.
We're an hour four in.
All right. Well, let's.
Did you want to make a Bowden Francis comment, because he was on the list? I mean, both you and I are both big Bowden Francis guys.
Yeah, we've been Bowden Francis fans since before the season started. He went to the Caribbean Winter League and before the 23 season, and he worked on his craft down there. I always think it's a necessary part of development. He came back, had a really good 23. So we were expecting what we're seeing now. We were expecting 2024 for Bowden Francis to be what we're seeing right now. So we're not surprised. We're happy that he's reached that point. It's another tool that they have moving forward. It's another part that they can plug in their plans for 2025, and good for Bowden Francis. But you know, it was part of their plan to begin with, and now he's finally filling that role and giving them hope for a rotation that doesn't need Kikuchi, that might not need Chris Bassett if they need that money rather than a flaky right-hander.
Well, and lest anybody accuse me of always being negative on these guys, that's another trade that looks like it's leaning toward a win, right? Rowdy Tellez was blocked by Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Rowdy's a lovely guy, but he really is just a guy. Bowden Francis, if he can be a pitcher, if he can be a fifth starter.
Richards and Bowden Francis has turned into a pretty good deal, and that was at the moment that Vlad was shifting across the diamond from third base to first base. So Rowdy Tellez was redundant. He wasn't going to play much. So yeah, I mean, that's the type of deal that this front office pops the champagne for. But it doesn't win, it doesn't win a playoff game, which they haven't done since 2016.
It's a good value play, but it's not. And that doesn't mean Bowden Francis can't contribute to a playoff caliber ball team, but it just, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And with that, we will leave it right there. Griffsthepitch.com is where you can get all of Griff's work, multiple weekly columns, weekly power ranking columns, and those become very relevant at this time of year, given that we're almost in the stretch drive. Heck, we're into the back end of August already. You get conversations with current and former Blue Jays, former Montreal Expos. You get the Exit Philosophy podcast there as well. You can get us on YouTube, youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. We come to you each and every Monday with a brand new episode, and we thank you so much for hanging in with us again, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Scotty, and thanks everyone for listening.